Around July 20, 216 BCE, near the river Aufidus, the two Roman consuls, following custom, established two separate camps. Across the river, Hannibal's army was encamped. According to Livy, the two consuls spent the days before the battle arguing rather than cooperating.
We must hold this
The patrician consul Paullus repeatedly urged caution, while his plebeian colleague Varro pushed for an immediate engagement. The Carthaginian army is estimated to have numbered between 45,000 and 50,000 men, while the Roman army had about 87,000. In cavalry, however, Carthage held the advantage, about 10,000 to Rome's 6,000.
There are no detailed daily records of the 10 or so days before the battle, but both sides likely spent the time scouting and engaging in minor skirmishes. Each army also required enormous amounts of water every day. On August 1, Numidian cavalry from Hannibal's force approached Roman soldiers who had gone to draw water. The Romans panicked and fled back to their camp. The Numidians pursued them almost to the gates, taunting the Romans. Yet no battle took place that day, because Paullus, who held command, restrained his forces. The next day, August 2 command passed to Varro. Without consulting Paullus, he ordered the army to cross the river, thus beginning the battle. Paullus, compelled by circumstance, also led his troops across.
Livy's account should not be accepted uncritically. In reality, both Paullus and Varro had come to end the war by defeating Hannibal once and for all. It is unlikely that one sought battle while the other tried to avoid it. Nevertheless, the alternating command system probably caused confusion among the troops. The essential point, however, is that both consuls were committed to fighting a decisive engagement. Moreover, for nearly 2 months they had sustained an army of over 80,000 men in the field, an enormous logistical burden. It was impossible to keep such a force fed indefinitely without a clear outcome. Inevitably, they had to fight soon.
For now, let us look at the Battle of Cannae in its generally accepted form. On the plains of Cannae, the Roman army deployed in a dense formation designed for a traditional frontal breakthrough. Hannibal, in contrast, arranged his line so that the center bulged outward, with elite African infantry positioned slightly behind on both flanks. Both armies placed their cavalry on the wings. When the battle began, the Romans pressed hard at the center, attempting to break through. Hannibal's central infantry gradually yielded ground, appearing to retreat under pressure. As the Romans advanced, the once convex Carthaginian line bent inward, forming a concave shape.
Meanwhile, Carthaginian cavalry on both flanks gained the upper hand over their Roman counterparts. The elite African infantry on the wings then pivoted inward, attacking the Roman flanks as the Roman infantry pushed deeper. Soon, the victorious Carthaginian cavalry closed in from the rear. At that moment, Hannibal's infantry stopped retreating, and the so-called double envelopment was complete. Trapped within this encirclement, the Roman army was virtually annihilated, or so the traditional story goes. In reality, a battle unfolding in such a perfectly geometric manner is almost impossible.
In open terrain, a complete encirclement and annihilation of the enemy is possible only when one side possesses overwhelmingly superior numbers. Even in a battle fought between forces of roughly equal size, attempting to encircle the opponent can be tantamount to tactical suicide. If the enemy, pressed to desperation, concentrates its attack on a weak point in the encirclement, the entire formation can collapse, leading to catastrophic failure. Some argue that superior mobility can make encirclement feasible with fewer troops, but even then, the encircling force must still outnumber the enemy. At Cannae, the Roman army had roughly 1.7 times as many troops as Hannibal's. Although the Carthaginian cavalry was stronger, the Romans also fielded cavalry of their own. Thus, the idea that Hannibal could completely surround and destroy a much larger enemy on an open plain seems, at first glance, almost absurd.
Even if an encirclement were somehow achieved, slaughtering all the trapped soldiers with swords and spears would have been anything but easy. There is a saying that a cornered rat will bite the cat. Likewise, when surrounded soldiers fight desperately for their lives, the attackers must be prepared to take heavy losses. In fact, traditional military doctrine advises leaving one avenue of escape open to encourage the enemy to flee. When an army sees a chance to retreat and breaks ranks in panic, that is the moment when a pursuing force can inflict devastating casualties. Ancient battle records confirm this pattern. Large-scale killing typically occurred during the rout and pursuit, not within a static encirclement. Therefore, the popular image of a smaller army completely surrounding a larger one and killing every enemy soldier inside is physically unrealistic.
Let us now reconstruct the Battle of Cannae in more plausible, real-world terms. Livy's account gives only a brief description of the terrain, making it difficult to grasp the battlefield's exact features. However, he does mention uneven ground and the presence of a river and embankment. From this, we can infer that one side of the battlefield was bounded by the river and its bank. Archaeological research further suggests that to the south of the Cannae plain, there was a steep slope formed by a limestone fault escarpment. In other words, the area where the Roman army deployed was hemmed in, on one side by the river and embankment, and on the other by the escarpment. Together, these features created a shallow, valley-like depression, roughly 1.3 kilometers wide.
The Roman attacking force, excluding reserves, is estimated at about 70,000 infantry. In simple terms, this means that 70,000 Roman soldiers were drawn up in a long, narrow formation within a confined space only 1.3 kilometers across. Traditionally, the Roman legions formed up in 10 ranks, leaving gaps between the lines to allow for rotation during combat. At Cannae, however, the formation was deepened to 20 ranks in order to maximize offensive power. Although some spacing was likely retained, the formation would have been a little denser than usual. In the early stages of the battle, the Romans fought methodically, rotating their front and rear ranks in accordance with their training. As their assault continued, Hannibal's convex center gradually buckled inward, at considerable cost to his own troops. Hannibal himself is said to have directed the retreating soldiers from the center. When the Carthaginian line appeared to give way, the Romans saw an opportunity and committed even more men to the attack, further reducing the spacing within their formation.
Hannibal's plan had been designed from the outset to absorb such losses. As the bulging center collapsed into a concave shape, his elite African infantry on both flanks pressed inward, while his cavalry routed the Roman horsemen and moved to cut off their rear. Some studies suggest that the fault escarpment contained natural gullies or depressions that allowed Hannibal's African infantry to maneuver around the Roman flanks undetected. With both sides blocked by the river and the steep slope, the Roman soldiers found themselves funneled toward the center. If the terrain had truly been an open plain, they would have tried desperately to break outward, and the Roman commanders might have attempted to redeploy their men laterally.
Extend to the flanks, don't bunch up.
But with all avenues of escape closed, they were forced inward, packed tightly together. A few tried to escape into the river, only to drown.
By the gods!
The Roman command grew increasingly desperate. If they failed to break through the Carthaginian center quickly, disaster seemed inevitable, so they poured in more and more troops. Yet the more soldiers they committed, the worse the congestion became. Instead of the entire formation surging forward like a massive log rolling ahead, only the foremost ranks were actually able to fight.
Hold the line!
The
Push
rest,
forward.
packed tightly behind them, merely hindered their comrades' movements. With tens of thousands crammed into a narrow space, room to maneuver all but disappeared. Polybius describes the scene as follows. The Romans, pressing forward at the center, became so tightly packed that they could no longer move their bodies or wield their weapons effectively. They were crushed together into one solid mass, hemmed in on all sides by the Carthaginians.
The Roman soldiers could no longer rotate their ranks, nor even thrust their short swords in close combat.
They're breaking through!
While they were immobilized, the Carthaginian troops methodically attacked from the outside in. Many Roman infantrymen trapped in the center did not die by the sword, but by crushing and suffocation. They were not unwilling to resist. They were physically incapable of doing so. The proportion of soldiers who perished from asphyxiation or compression cannot be known with certainty, but based on modern AI-assisted simulations of battlefield conditions, it is estimated to have been between 10 and 35%. These figures are, of course, only rough approximations meant to illustrate the situation. Still, such an interpretation helps explain how a smaller force could annihilate a much larger one. The precise location of the Battle of Cannae remains a matter of scholarly debate. Yet this reconstruction offers a far more realistic account of how events could have unfolded.
Why then did Rome put itself in such a perilous position? The Roman command was deeply anxious about Hannibal's use of cavalry and ambush tactics. They feared the open plains, where Hannibal could maneuver at will. Although Rome had suffered a series of defeats against him, the Romans had reason to believe that frontal engagements favored their strengths. At the Battle of the Trebia, for instance, the consul Sempronius was defeated but still managed to break through the enemy's center and lead about 10,000 men to safety. Later, he even managed to block Hannibal's advance and fight on roughly equal terms. At Lake Trasimene, though the Roman army was virtually annihilated, a vanguard of 6,000 troops succeeded in breaking through the Carthaginian lines and reaching higher ground.
From these precedents, the Roman leadership concluded that attacking the center offered their best chance of success. Moreover, they believed that if the battlefield's flanks were secured by natural features, Hannibal's cavalry would have little room to maneuver. That, in turn, would allow the Romans to concentrate their strength in a single massive assault on the center. In the end, the Roman staff decided that the valley-like terrain would strengthen their dense formation and restrict Hannibal's mobility. Hannibal, however, turned these very conditions to his advantage, a display of strategic genius in every sense. That concludes today's discussion. In the next episode, we will look into who actually commanded the Roman forces at Cannae. Thank you for watching.